Hello everyone, welcome to our video. Now in this video I will talk about conditional statements and if statements in our programming. So uh, let's start with some basic example. So if we want to write an if statement, as you see here, first I assign these two variables. I have this a and my number equals to 4. Then I can write a single if statement, and I can have the conditional part given in this parenthesis. And then we will have these curly brackets, and we will execute the lines of code in between these parentheses if this conditional statement is true. If this is false, then nothing will be executed for this, and it will move on to the next line, getting out of this if statement. So the conditional part here, we can see basically a less than or equal to my number, right? This is the conditional statement that we have. And this statement, for this example, this is true. 3 is less than or equal to 4, obviously. So this part is true. That means it will execute the code that is between these two parentheses here. Okay. So we might have also other like lines of code here. So let's say we might print something like a is smaller than my number. I mean, just to demonstrate that we might have several lines of code, and this chunk of code here, it will be executed if this statement here is true. So if we run this few lines of code, we can see that basically we'll we will take the square of this a, and then this statement is also printed, is displayed on our console here. Okay, so it is how we use a simple if statement in R programming, and you can have several lines of code. You can do other calculations or computations. You can extend this example as you prefer. Now let's do another example here. And in this second example, you see we created again a vector. Let's say we call this as my vector. So this is my vector. We have 9 elements in this vector that we created now. And let's create a matrix. And as you can see, we have a 3 by 3 matrix. And these are the arbitrary values of the matrix, basically. And if you run, again, you can check what you created, display on the console. And this is our matrix that we created. Now, again, we want to write a simple if statement. So our conditional part is this one. And then we have these curly brackets. Basically, if the conditional part is true, the whole these lines of code here from 15 to 19, these will be executed if the conditional statement is true. So here we have an OR operator, and in an OR operator, this logical operation, basically if one of these statements is true, then the result of the OR operation is going to be true. So it is just enough to have at least one true statement in one of these, then the OR operation will give us the true statement, and we will be executing the lines of the code from 15 to 19, these given in the curly brackets. So for this example, if we check these statements, my vector minus 1 greater than 9, any, so this means if we have any elements that this is satisfied, then this is the first part of this OR operation will be true. And you can run this and you can check any, so basically none of these elements in this vector are greater than 9. So this means it's a false statement. So this one is false. And then The second conditional part comes into play. Here we have, sorry, I forgot one parenthesis here. So let me run this part. Okay, so this one is true. And as we said, it is enough to have one of these true, since the OR operation will give us the true value. Then we will be executing the lines inside of these curly brackets. And then basically, if I run this code, it will execute this. First, it will run this line, and it will display a list with two members now exist. Okay. So this condition satisfied is displayed, and then we create this new myVector variable, and then we assign the index values with 1, 9, and 2 to NA. Okay. And then mylist basically is created here using this new vector and my matrix plus 0.5. So we add 0.5 to each element of the my matrix, that is, which is a 3 by 3 matrix here. So you can run this separately as well. And then basically we display this result on the screen. So if when we run the whole thing here, we have this line, and then we have another display on the screen. So as you see, we can have a logical operator here, such as OR operator or AND operator. And then basically in an OR operation, if one of these is true, then the OR operation gives us true. In an AND operator, if this is an AND operation, then both of them, if both of them are true, then we get a true statement. Otherwise, we get a false statement. And then if it is false, then none of these lines are executed after the check of this conditional statement. Okay, so this is basically our examples for using the if statement. Now we can do another example with nested conditional statements. So in a nested statement, so let's put a comment here. Nested if statement. In a typical nested statement, we will have one conditional here, let's say a less than or equal to my number. Then we might have this condition, and we execute some lines of code, such as displaying something on the screen, on the console. First, let's say condition was true. Okay, if this is satisfied, and we put a new line here after we display this, and then we do the calculation a equals to a square. Now we might have one more if statement. So this is the nested now, nested an if statement within another if statement. That's what we mean by the nested conditional statement. So we can have another condition like my number, let's say, is greater than 3. In this case, basically first we display some message on the console. Second condition was true. Let's say this is what we want to display. And then we can assign the b equals to the values as a sequence 1, a, and length equals to my number. Okay, so we increment by this, and then we have the parenthesis is closed here, and then we might have the else part. Okay, so if the conditional part here is not true, if this is not true, then it will move on to the else part, and it will run the code in between these, again, curly parentheses. And here again we can display something on the screen. Let's say second condition was false this time. If this condition is false, then it will move on to the else part and it will execute the codes under these between these curly parentheses. Okay, so and then we can say b equals to a times my number. Okay, just some. We can do other arbitrary, calculations or different operations as well. Now let's say once we get out of this else statement, we come to this first if statement. So if we also want to have an else part for this condition, a less than or equal to my number, then we can add that one here. We can write an else statement, open the parentheses, and enter. So now we can write what should we do in this else part. Okay. So for example, we can display a message. First condition was false. If we enter this else part, basically that was false, we create a new line, and then we can continue to have a few more lines. Let's say a equals to a minus 3.6, and then let's say it continues with my number equals to greater than or equal to 4, let's say. And then we again have the parentheses. We need to do something here. Second condition was true. Okay. And then we will write, let's say, b. Sorry, I forgot to put the parentheses here. So I will move this under that. Okay, and then we might have some other lines of code such as b equals to a square, let's say 3 minus my number. I mean, you can change these. Again, these are just for demonstration purposes. And then for this if statement, we can also have an else part. Okay, and then we can display some text. Second condition was false, let's say. And then we write another line of code. A times my number times equals to 3. And then once we get out of these if statements, we can display what's the value for A and what's the value for B. Again, going over this example now, it's a bit longer example because we have demonstrated the nested if statement. So we have this initial if statement where we check whether my number is less than or whether A is less than or equal to my number. And if this statement is true, then we will get into this line 25 and continue from this point forward. We display something on the screen. We take the square of A and assign it to A. Then we check this condition here. My number is greater than 3 or not. Then if this is also true, then we will move in here and execute these two lines. But if this one is false, then it will move on to the else part and it will basically check, it will display this message and assign B equals to A, okay? A times my number, sorry. But if the first condition was false, then it will go over to this else part. It will mention first condition was false and do some other operations. There is one more if statement nested. And again, if this one is true, then it will move in. If this is not true, then it will go to the else statement and run these two lines of code. So this shows you the logic, how the nested statement works. Okay, and here we already assigned some numbers for a and my number. So if you run that, and if you run the nested if statement, okay, so if we run the nested if statement here, we can see what happens with b and our a. We did some operation. Basically, the first condition was true. If the first condition was true, basically 3 is less than or equal to 4 initially. We have assigned a equals to 3, my number equals to 4, as we see also in the environment here. And you can see that if we just run this again, a equals to 3, okay, my number equals to 4. So this statement is true, and it will display first condition was true, and then it will move on to the second condition. A will become a squared, so it will become 9. And if my number, which is basically originally we entered as 4, if this is greater than or equal to 4, this is also going to be true in our example. It will display here, right, and get out of the basically if statement. So this is, you can run this and you can see what is our last a and b. Okay, so we assign this for a and b here. Our a becomes 9 and b becomes this vector here.